Welcome, everyone. On behalf of SysGroup and the planning team, I have the pleasure of welcoming you to Aware for All Northwest. My name is Justine Holleran. I'm the coordinator of events and community engagement at SysGroup. SysGroup, or the Center for Information and Study on Clinical Research Participation, is a nonprofit organization that educates the public about clinical research. We do not conduct trials or recruit for trials, but we believe that everyone should have the information they need to be informed about clinical research. To make sure that this program is a meaningful educational experience for you, we ask for your feedback. We'll have 7 poll questions pop up on the screen throughout the program. Answering these questions will serve as raffle entries. So let's start with an easy question to test out the poll feature. I'm participating in the webinar as a member of an exhibiting organization, a professional involved or associated with clinical research, or the general public or a caregiver interested in learning more about clinical research. You'll have 30 seconds to answer each poll question that pops up throughout the program. If you have any questions throughout the event, please shoot us a message in the Q&A box. Our team will be monitoring the chat and will bring up any questions you may have during the Q&A portion. Our ability to live long, healthy lives is due largely in part to advances in medical treatments, advances that would not be possible without the participation of volunteers in clinical research. I also want to take a moment to acknowledge any of our audience members who have participated in clinical research. We thank you for your important contribution to advance medical science and health for all of us. SysGroup was honored to collaborate on this important program with many community and research organizations. These groups help spread the word about the AWARE program. You can visit many of these groups in our Informational Exhibit Center by clicking the link in the Resource tab or clicking either of the banner images on your screen. You can revisit the Informational Exhibit Center whenever you'd like, but when you visit, be sure to keep an eye out for the special scavenger hunt kiosk. We also invite you to save the dates that are up on the slides now for our upcoming programs in other regions of the country that you may wish to share with your friends and family. This information will also be in the follow-up email you receive after the program. Now, I would like to recognize our planning team. For the past few months, these dedicated individuals have helped organize today's virtual event. Without their help and support, this program would not have been possible. We'd also like to thank our generous Aware for All sponsors, all of whom contributed funds and support to make this program free and accessible to all. A very special thank you to our Aware Industry Consortium, Biogen, CSL Behring, EMD Serono, Genentech, IQVIA, Janssen, Novartis, Otsuka, Pfizer, and WCG for providing support to bring this educational program to 5 regions this year. To our national and local supporters, Allergy and Asthma Network and Seattle Cancer Care Alliance, and to our in-kind outreach supporters and exhibitors. Thank you for all your continued support. In honor of Clinical Trials Awareness Month and Clinical Trials Day, I would also like to recognize the research professionals in the audience who have participated in COVID-19 trials with this short educational video.
So I've been in the clinical research industry for, over 20 years.
2 decades.
25 years.
10 years.
28 years.
20 years.
25 years.
Having seen all kinds of vaccine research as a sponsor, I understood what it takes to bring a vaccine to the world. It all really boils down to human volunteers.
I wanted to do whatever small part I could do to try and, find a way to bring an end to the pandemic. Being in clinical research, the opportunity to kind of give back to this field that's done so much for me. You don't really know what it's like to be a participant until you've been in those shoes.
Interacting with members of the public, I encountered a gentleman who told me he wouldn't take the coronavirus vaccine unless he could see other Black people working on it or associated with it. What better way to lead by example, but also to help bring some transparency to the process than to participate myself?
I'm a pharmacologist by training. And so scientifically, I was really interested in trying to solve this problem and how we were going to create a new platform of medicines based on this mRNA technologies.
I've never seen this level of collaboration between, private and government and just even across different companies who are competitors to come together and to try and make this happen.
We're comparing notes, we're putting ourselves in the patient's shoes more squarely.
I think what we're doing is we're putting
hope on the line when we choose to participate in trials. It's no different than our friends or family who have gone through clinical trials for cancer.
Every medicine that has ever come to the world has become a reality because people volunteer. And if we want medicine and medical innovations to come faster, it's going to rely on the volunteers, and it's going to rely on study designers and investigators and doctors to make it happen.
I know from working with the FDA that they would only approve something, particularly with an external advisory board reviewing the data, they would only approve something that really showed clinical significance and was safe for the population to use.
No one should ever doubt that when they approve something, that they've really paid close attention to the quality and the patient safety, because that's really all they care about.
A lot of the communities I work in are underserved Black communities. There's an opportunity to increase acceptance of the vaccine by educating and helping people understand the process, and by showing them that there are Black and brown people in positions of leadership, working in the health sector, who are involved in these processes.
It's critical that we get up to 75-80% people vaccinated so we can get out of the pandemic.
We need people to recognize that we're trying to our utmost ability to keep all people safe.
In just a moment, I'll turn it over to Susan Colin, who will provide an overview of clinical research participation. After that, we'll host a panel discussion with study volunteers and research professionals, all sharing information about their roles in the clinical research process. We encourage you to send in questions through the Q&A box or by emailing awareforall@syscript.org. We'll open for a Q&A directly following the panel discussion. And after that, we'll have a quick Zumba exercise provided by our friends at Team Survivor Northwest. And finally, we'll conclude with our Med-Hero ceremony and host our raffle. So let's get started. To follow along with the presentation, you can download the digital handbook from our resource center in the bottom right-hand corner of your screen. You'll also receive a link to download the handbook after the event. Poll question number 1 should have just popped up on your screens. How would you rate your knowledge of clinical research? You'll have 30 seconds to answer. Again, the question is, how would you rate your knowledge of clinical research? Don't forget that by answering these questions, your name will be entered into a raffle at the end of the program. It's my sincere pleasure to welcome Susan Colin, Program Director at breastcancertrials.org.
Welcome to Aware for All Northwest. We're thrilled that so many of you are joining us to learn more about clinical research. This program is brought to you by CISCRIP, the Center for Information and Study on Clinical Research Participation, with support from local organizations. I'm Susan Colin, a CISCRIP volunteer and Program Director at breastcancertrials.org, which is a clinical trial education and matching service for patients. Our goal is to help you understand the clinical research process, including the risks and benefits of participating. Have you ever taken allergy medicine or a pain reliever? If so, you can thank clinical research participants. Around the world, people are living longer and healthier lives because of the selfless individuals who take part in clinical research trials. These trials help find ways to prevent, treat, and even cure medical conditions. We like to call the participants medical heroes. At CISCRIP, we believe study volunteers are important partners in the research process. That's why our motto is education before participation. Partnerships work best when everyone understands the overall goal, what may be expected of them, and how they are protected throughout the process. This includes clinical researchers too. The information medical experts learn from clinical trials improves public health and can even save lives. And it all starts with these questions. How does a disease progress and how can it be prevented? How well does a new drug work or not work? Is there a better way to treat a disease? Does where people live affect their health? Researchers can only answer these questions with the help of clinical research participants. A clinical trial is a carefully designed study in which a participant may be asked to take a new drug or treatment so that researchers can understand and answer a specific medical question. These are questions like, is a treatment safe? Does it improve a certain medical condition? Does it have side effects? How much should people take? Is it any better than medicines that are already available? Because researchers are studying new treatments, there are risks to participants in a clinical trial. However, something valuable is always learned from clinical research studies that improve public health and could potentially lead to game-changing treatments. It's important to understand that being in a clinical trial is not the same as going to your doctor for care. When you go to your doctor, they'll give you a treatment that has already been tested and approved by the government. This is called routine or standard of care. You can't fully understand something by studying just one group of people. Gender, age, and ethnicity affect the way people respond to diseases and treatments. For example, Alzheimer's disease happens twice as often in women than in men. Type 2 diabetes and asthma are more common in people who are Black or of African descent. Hispanic, Asian, and white women are more likely to develop osteoporosis. For many years, most clinical trials included white men only. This meant that the information collected in those trials was not complete and could not tell us how treatments affected other groups. But today, clinical trials welcome the participation of all people, and they are closely monitored for their safe and ethical treatment. Today, health professionals are more aware than ever of the need to have diverse populations in clinical research. As a community, we are taking steps to break down participation barriers, improve diversity, and pave the way to a healthier future for everyone. Studies have shown that underrepresented minority populations consistently demonstrate a high willingness to participate in clinical research studies. Individuals within these communities have said that lack of access to clinical trials is the primary reason why they don't participate. This includes outreach and communications that fail to reach them, health and research professionals not asking them to participate, clinical trials that are too far away, and participation requirements that are too difficult to follow. You may remember past abuses like the Tuskegee syphilis study, in which treatment was withheld from Black men for many years, or the story of Henrietta Lacks and what are now known as HeLa cells, one of the most commonly used cell lines in scientific research. These studies experimented on patients without their consent and were not compensated for their participation. Today, federal guidelines and ethical practices are in place to monitor the safety and to protect the rights of trial participants. If we work together, we can solve these problems and make clinical trials far more accessible. Let's talk a bit about how clinical trials move forward and how long it takes to advance new treatment. Clinical trials begin with a small number of participants. The goal of this is to learn more about how safe a new treatment is. Next, clinical trials recruit larger numbers of participants to test how well the treatment works and help researchers learn more about its safety. This part can take several years. Researchers continue to study treatments after they've been approved. These trials usually involve a large number of participants. In these trials, researchers look at real-world experience and check to see if the treatment works well over a long time. You've probably heard a lot in the news lately about the development of vaccines and treatments for COVID-19. Vaccines and treatments for infectious diseases usually take 9 or 10 years to develop. This seems like a long time, but it's necessary for understanding if a treatment is safe and effective at specific dosage levels. However, the clinical trial process for COVID-19 treatments and vaccines is moving at a faster pace and may produce promising therapies in only a few years. Some treatments and vaccines have a head start because they're based on research that was conducted for viruses that are similar to COVID-19. The pandemic has mobilized much higher levels of coordination between companies and government agencies which helps speed up the process. Clinical trials can be sponsored by the government, academic medical centers, pharmaceutical companies, biotechnology companies, or medical device companies. Clinical trial research requires many different people, each of whom is critical to the process. Like members of a sports team, clinical trials have coaches, players, and referees, and each person has an important role to play. The principal investigator, or the PI, is like the head coach of a team. They're responsible for organizing and leading the trial, as well as recording and analyzing the data. Like a head coach, the PI follows a playbook, which is called the trial protocol. The protocol is a set of instructions that everyone on the team must follow. The research staff members are like assistant coaches who help the PI. The clinical research coordinator handles the day-to-day activity at the research site. They work closely with the PI and are the main contact for participants. Organizations that help protect the safety of participants are the referees. The referees make sure teams follow the rules, review the trial before it starts, and keep participants safe. The number and type of referees involved in a trial depends on the research being conducted. Every clinical trial is reviewed, approved, and supervised by an independent local ethics committee. This committee makes sure a trial is ethical and fair and that there is not too much risk for participants. During the trial, researchers must let the committee know if there are any changes in the trial plan, or if participants experience serious injuries or side effects. The ethics committee can end the trial if it feels participants are not safe. Referees from the federal government are also involved. Agencies like the FDA or the European Medicines Agency review trials, inspect research centers, and monitor research groups to make sure they're following federal guidelines. These agencies have the final say in whether or not a treatment is approved. Now let's talk about the most important members of the team, the trial participants. Participants are like the players on the field. Without them, clinical research can't happen. We need all different types of people to participate in clinical research. Research can include sick or healthy participants. Your friends and family can be your support system while you're taking part in a trial. They can help you come up with questions to ask your doctor. In the end, it's your job to make the final decision if you will participate in the trial. Everyone has the chance to participate in research. You just have to find the clinical trial that is right for you. Just like in sports, clinical trials have eligibility criteria. These are guidelines that indicate who can and cannot be in a trial. Eligibility criteria ensure that the clinical trial is studying the right people under the right conditions. If you're considering a trial, be honest with researchers about your health. Lying or hiding information to get into a trial could endanger your safety and harm the research. Okay, let's assume the coaches say you're eligible to play. The next question you have to ask yourself is, do I choose to play? You cannot say whether or not you want to participate without understanding the rules of the game. What are your responsibilities as a player? How long will the game last? What are the risks and benefits of playing? The informed consent process is designed to answer all of these questions and is required by the FDA and local ethics committees. Informed consent is one of the most important parts of research, and it's a term you're going to hear a lot. Remember that informed consent is an ongoing process throughout the whole trial, not a single event. If you decide you're interested in participating in a clinical trial, the trial staff will go through the informed consent form with you and answer any questions. Before you can participate in a trial, you must read, understand, and sign the informed consent form. It's important to note that you don't have to review the informed consent form in English if there's another language that you prefer to speak. If you participate in a clinical trial, you have rights. You have the right to understand the purpose, benefits, risks, and side effects of the clinical trial. You have the right to ask questions and discuss your concerns. It's important for participants to ask questions until they fully understand the trial. Most importantly, you have the right to quit the trial at any time for any reason. The research staff will help you to do this safely. Deciding to take part in a clinical trial is a personal decision. What's right for you may not be right for someone else. Researchers set up their studies so that the trial will be fair. They also want their research to be accurate and unbiased. They don't want their own ideas about what they think should happen in a trial to influence the results. To set up fair studies, participants may be randomly split into different trial groups. In this case, the researcher and the participants do not get to decide which group the participants will be in. This is called a randomized trial. Sometimes the participants do not know which treatments they're receiving. When the participants or researchers in a clinical study both don't know which treatment the participant gets, it's called blinding. In some trials, researchers will use a placebo. A placebo looks like a trial treatment but does not have any medicine in it. Sometimes the placebo in the form of a drug is referred to as a sugar pill. What's interesting is that even though the placebo has no medicine in it, there are times when people who are taking a placebo improve or feel better during a trial. This is called the placebo effect. Deciding to participate in a clinical trial is a personal decision. Here are some of the reasons why you might consider getting involved in trials. Get access to new treatments that are not publicly available. Advance science and help others who have the same condition as you. Receive free and close healthcare monitoring. Some, but not all, clinical trials will pay for travel costs and for time and commitment. The amounts vary widely. These benefits are in addition to the help you will provide for health research. Of course, all research involves risks. There can be physical risks. A sick patient may not get better. They may feel uncomfortable or their symptoms may get worse. There's an emotional risk. The trial can be demanding and participation may be stressful. Financially, there may be out-of-pocket expenses such as childcare or missing work. And when you agree to participate in research, you're giving permission for the researchers to collect information about you. Participating takes time and effort. You can work with the trial staff to try to accommodate your schedule. The trial may end early. Even if you want to continue to participate, your doctor, the referees, or the company making the new drug can stop the trial at any time. Unfortunately, many participants drop out of studies because they don't fully understand what they were signing up for. Here are some tips if you're in a trial. Do your homework. Read all the information provided by the trial staff. You can even go online to learn about the potential treatment being studied. Take your time. There's absolutely nothing wrong with asking a researcher to slow down. Ask questions. Bring up any concerns with the trial staff, your doctor, or your friends and family. Bring a friend or family member to ask questions too. If you decide to join a trial, you should feel confident that you have made an informed choice. You should feel comfortable that the clinical trial staff will support you and answer all of your questions. There are a lot of things to consider when you decide to participate in a clinical trial. Today's presentation is an important first step. Now it's up to you to learn more about clinical trials. The best place to start is with your doctor. You can also get information from local research centers, disease advocacy groups, and conferences. You can also find more information in the SysGrip booth in the Information Exhibit Center. Clinical research participants truly are medical heroes, without whom medical science cannot move forward. On behalf of all of us at SysGrip, thanks to the millions of people who give the gift of participation in clinical trials each year, and to the rest of us who admire them for doing so. We appreciate you taking the time today to learn about the clinical research process, and we strongly encourage you to share what you've learned with your friends, family, and people throughout your community.
Thank you so much, Susan. We've been receiving some great questions from our audience, and one that I would love to ask you is, how do you determine if a clinical trial is right for you? Do you have any advice that you'd like to share to somebody who is considering getting involved in trial?
Firstly, talk to your doctor about clinical trials. It's important to remember that you're a partner in determining your treatment plan. And be as informed as you can. As you just heard, the more information you have, the better able you'll be to make an informed decision and one that's right for you. and ask all the questions you have. You can also look to advocacy groups that often have a list of questions to ask your doctor or a research site about clinical trials, because sometimes you don't even know what questions to ask. Also, talking to friends and family, as well as to your doctor, about your thoughts and feelings about participating in a trial. If you have access to the internet, you can find and read blogs and articles about other people who have participated in clinical trials. You may even find an interview with someone who has the same cancer or disease as you do. And also, consider how comfortable you are with your treatment plan. How do you feel about what's been recommended for your treatment? Is it more or less treatment than you're comfortable with? You might find a trial looking at whether someone like you can skip certain parts of treatment, or whether someone with your diagnosis may need more or a different type of treatment. You might also find a treatment plan that's more aligned with your lifestyle or your quality of life. For example, you might find a trial that requires taking a pill instead of having to go to the hospital once a week to receive the drug by IV or injection.
Susan, thank you again. We really appreciate you providing a foundation of information about clinical research. I just want to encourage everyone again to share any questions with us through the Q&A box or by emailing awareforall@syscript.org. We'll be collecting questions as they're coming through. Here we have poll question number 2. Have you ever participated in a clinical trial? Thanks for answering. Poll question number 3 is now on your screens, and we're testing your knowledge after that presentation. True or false? Responses to medicines can vary depending on several factors, including someone's genetic background, ethnicity, sex, and lifestyle. This is why scientists need to have diverse representation in clinical trials. We're going to follow that up with question number 4, true or false. An institutional review board's role is to make sure that the study is ethical and that the rights and welfare of participants are protected. As we move on to the panel portion of the program, I want to remind everyone once again that our Q&A feature is available. It's a great way to interact with our speakers and ask them any questions you may have about clinical research. I'd like to welcome Stephanie Loomer, Project Manager of Research Services at SysGrip, who will be moderating our panel discussion. And our speakers, clinical trial participant Helen Russon, clinical trial participant Desiree Deluca-Johnson, Dr. Rachel Bender-Ignacio, Assistant Professor and Director at the University of Washington AIDS Clinical Trial Unit, and Medical Director of the COVID-19 Clinical Research Center at Fred Hutchinson Cancer Research Center. Luis Arroyo, Specialist of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion in Clinical Trials at Janssen, and Patrick Ezeh, Director of Clinical Operations Program Leadership at Biogen.
My name is Stephanie Loomer, and I am a project manager for SysGrip. I wanted to thank you all for joining us today, and I want to thank our panelists for joining us as well. These panelists are coming to us from all different backgrounds and have been involved in clinical research in different ways, some as volunteers, members of investigative sites to conduct research, or help to plan and manage clinical trials. So I would like to begin by introducing our panel members and then open it up for a discussion. So we'll first start with Helen Russon. I'll turn it over to you for a quick introduction.
I'm Helen. I've had MS since 1990s. I've known about it since 1996. I would say that being a part of the National MS Society and participating in the clinical trials has been a real lifesaver for me. It's allowed me to be part of the solution, not part of the problem. And part of the problem. And I just really feel blessed that there are such medications out there and people that are striving to make things better for people with MS. I know I sound like a commercial, but I really mean it. So that's it for now.
Thank you so much, Helen, and thank you for joining us. I'll turn it over to Desiree Deluca-Johnson, if you want to introduce yourself.
Yeah, hi, I'm Desiree Deluca-Johnson. Thank you for having this panel and bringing awareness of clinical trials to more people. I was diagnosed with stage 2B breast cancer in 2017 when I was 40 years old. And since then, I have enrolled in one clinical trial for treatment. I did an experimental therapy for a year to prevent recurrence. And I've enrolled in 2 trials for monitoring for recurrence, one looking at bone marrow stuff and another a blood biopsy. And I've loved my clinical trial experience, and I was dismayed about how hard it was to find a trial. So I now work for breastcancertrials.org, doing public outreach and education and summarizing clinical trials so more men, women, and others can find trials if they need them. Thanks.
Well, thank you so much for the work you do, Desiree, and for joining us today. I'll turn it to Dr. Rachel Bender-Ignacio.
Hi, I'm Rachel Bender-Ignacio. I'm a physician scientist in infectious disease at the University of Washington. I wear 2 different hats as pertains to COVID clinical research. I'm the director of our AIDS clinical trials unit here at Harborview Medical Center, where we focus mainly on HIV treatment studies and HIV remission studies, but have pivoted as part of the National Institutes of Health effort to find COVID treatments to be part of the Rise Above COVID project, or the ACTIV-2 international study for COVID treatment. And additionally, I'm the medical director for the COVID-19 Clinical Research Center at the Fred Hutch, where we have a number of interventional and observational studies for people with or recovering from COVID as well. And I also myself have participated in a vaccine trial.
Wonderful, thank you. And Luis Arroyo.
Hi, good morning, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Luis Arroyo, and I'm a specialist on the Diversity, Equity, Inclusion Clinical Trials team here at Janssen. I'm super excited to hear everyone's stories and really excited about this panel. So just a little bit more about my role, that I'm more specifically involved in, like the internal and external communications and outreach strategies around diversity, equity, and inclusion regarding clinical trials. So like a little bit more about our team, like at our core, we're here to help ensure that everyone has access to the highest quality healthcare possible by utilizing, cutting edge science and advancing health equity, and to create a better future for our patients. Aside from my Janssen hat, I also wear, I'm a chapter leader of the Hispanic Association for Leadership and Achievement. Hispanic Organization for Leadership and Achievement. The acronym is OLA, so we have like a bunch of employee resource groups at Janssen. So very excited about outreach and helping our communities and everyone around us. So very excited to be here today. Thanks.
Thank you. And last but not least, I'll turn it to you, Patrick Ezeh.
I'm Patrick Ezeh, and I'm director here at Biogen in the clinical operations program leadership. I have been at Biogen just 2 years, and I've been working on different therapeutic areas, including multiple sclerosis. And in my role on a day-to-day basis is basically working as what we call research and development program team to take new chemical entities, new drugs, get them to the clinic, and then take them to its logical conclusion, hopefully getting them to market. It doesn't always work that way. And then additional role that I have, which is different from my program development role, is one of the what we call underrepresented population champions here at Biogen, where we trying to see how we can make sure that for all our studies, there is adequate representation of the study participants from all areas, all ethnic groups, and then all genders and everything, so that we make sure that the population participating in our studies is an accurate reflection of the population in general, and then obviously the population that we expect to use the drug should it come to market. So I'm looking forward to hearing what everybody has to say, especially those that have been study participants, on how we can do better as we move along to make clinical trials and clinical trial participation as smooth as possible, and as make it less, let it not be a situation where people are afraid or where it is so involving that it discourages people from participating. So we want to make it accommodate those participants as much as possible.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Patrick. And what a fantastic group of panelists we have with us. I'm so excited to get the conversation started. So I really, to kick off, I want to ask you all to think about what you just told me, your experiences and perspectives of clinical research. So I'll start with, what are some aspects of your clinical trial experiences that stood out to you? And I know we have the two volunteers with us today, so maybe I'll turn it to you, Helen, first. You know, what were some things that stood out to you? What are some things that you really enjoyed about your participation?
I very much enjoyed meeting the doctors. I really have enjoyed getting to know them as people. I've enjoyed knowing that I'm getting good care while I'm involved in the study. Primarily though, I do a lot of volunteer work with the National MS Society, and I am really, and I don't think thrilled is too strong a word, I'm very thrilled to try to be part of what's going to hopefully be a cure for MS. And also to work on, some of the clinical trials are not so much for a cure, but for making people that have MS more comfortable, making them more comfortable living with their symptoms. And I'm very pleased to be part of that. So I'm a volunteer at heart, and this is one of my favorite volunteer projects.
Thanks so much, Helen. Desiree, what has your experience been like? What's something that might have stood out to you?
Oh, I've loved my clinical trial experience. I think the benefits that have been most meaningful for me as a person who was really suffering from a fear of recurrence, being in the trial helped me feel kind of contained and gave me an outlet for my anxiety. I was able to connect with a top researcher, who became my oncologist. He's also incredibly kind. And I had gone through a couple of oncologists. I might be a difficult patient. I ask a lot of questions, and I just love my relationship with my oncologist. I feel safe and that I can trust his professional opinion. I've gotten access to the standard of care, not just to newer treatments, but I lived in a part of the country where not everyone has access to standard of care for breast cancer treatment. And so it was a relief to get just even that, let alone experimental therapies. And I have two daughters. They were 4 and 6 when I was diagnosed, and they are Latinas through their dad. And I worry about them at being higher risk for breast cancer. And so I am grateful to be doing anything to help find a cure or medications to let people live longer, happier lives.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. I'd be curious to hear from those of you involved in clinical research and planning. What are some aspects or resources that you all may have provided to participants to really help them enroll and stay engaged in clinical trials?
I can say something. I think just to add to what Desiree said, I don't think you should consider yourself a difficult patient or a difficult participant. I think when it comes to clinical trials, especially, the more questions you ask, the better. And then the better the physician is able to address your worries, address your needs. And there are a lot of times people, study participants or people considering participating in clinical trials, don't know everything that is available to them, don't know everything that is involved. And sometimes it can get scary, and that may discourage people from participating. So asking questions to me is a plus. It shouldn't be considered as a minus. And With respect to the question you asked, what we provide to help study participants in participating in clinical trials, one thing we try to do is that from the outset, when we are developing a protocol, for example, we try to get input from patient populations, using different options. Sometimes you have foundations that cater to or that take in a particular indication, and then they can give you access to people with that disease that can provide input in terms of what it would take for them to feel comfortable participating in your study. So you want to make sure that you get their input when you are designing your study. It doesn't help to have a protocol that cannot be executed, that you cannot enroll anybody in. And then you want to make sure that your protocol is exactly fit for purpose, i.e., you collect what you need, not necessarily what you want. It has to be what you need so that the subjects, you make it as less involving as much as possible. You don't want to ask a participant to be coming to the clinic, for example, every week for months and months. So you just want to make sure that you get their input. And then we also try to get input from the investigators that will be running those trials. What exactly do you see in this study design and this study design that will make it difficult for you to recruit patients to participate in? And what exactly do you see that is a plus? So in addition, we offer a lot of assistance in terms of study participants, reimbursements for a lot of out-of-pocket expenses. Sometimes, even if it involves a patient that will stay in a hotel overnight, you make allowance for that to reimburse them for that. But you work with the physician to make sure that you are addressing the needs. It may be transportation. Many times you have participants that don't have access to transportation, and then you reimburse them to make sure that they can meet those visits. So there are a lot of things that we do to make sure that we try to address the needs of the study participants.
I'd love to just add to that from the perspective of doing COVID clinical trials. One of the things that's been really beautiful about having people on study is the engagement with people as science has evolved so quickly. As many of you know, there are there's news in the lay press every week pretty much about something that's different for COVID treatment or vaccines. And so one of the things I think that's been a really great benefit for people on study is being able to text us, myself or one of our nurses whenever they want or need with questions or ask at appointments about, hey, I heard that there's new data on this, or vaccines just came out. Should I get it? How does that interact with the study treatment that I got? What do you think about this new thing that just was announced? And to just be able to kind of continue to provide people with that cutting edge science and how it relates to them personally in their experience of having COVID recently.
Yeah, and then just to build upon, I guess the first thing I wanted to mention, Desiree, I think I love the part about asking questions. I think it's just so important to, know like what your not responsibilities, but like what your rights are as a participant, right? Like knowing that you can ask questions, knowing that you can, opt out at any point, right? You're not locked into anything. So I think that's great. And then just to keep honing in on what Patrick was saying as well, it's like, from the patient experience perspective, I just think that it's just so important to educate. And we really come from, from my team at Johnson, we come from the education perspective, right? Just to give everyone a really positive experience and to making sure that they're all included, right, in clinical trials. So creating like appropriately relevant materials based on like, cultural competency, language, and really educating those communities. And then just giving like basic responses, like, to our materials, like what is a clinical trial? What are the phases? What is informed consent? And then also translating that and making sure that, the ICFs are translated, to making sure everyone can kind of understand. And then just to even go, further, just from the, there's also like a trust aspect, right? So it's like, we want to build trust within these communities and around clinical trials, because there's been like past experiences, right? Like many years ago with like Henrietta Lacks and, Tuskegee, the Puerto Rican birth control trials, that for diverse communities, it makes it hard for them to participate because they feel like, there's a little bit of hesitancy there. So we just need to make sure that these communities are kind of like, they're understanding what clinical trials are about, because the things that happen during those trials, they influence, future trials, because now we have, agencies that help protect your rights as a participant, right? To making sure that everything's protected. And then also, I love the access piece, right? Because that one's huge. From my background, so my background is actually nutrition. So we have this thing about like a food desert, right? And visually, you think it's like an actual desert with like no food around. But in all actuality, it may be like a city where it's like all you have for food is a bodega that sells like, chips on the corner, right? So you don't have access to fruit and vegetables. And it's the same thing with like healthcare, right? So you have like transportation issues, you have language issues. So it's like if people can't actually get to the trial or get to a site or whatever it may be, how do they have like the necessary healthcare for them? Or maybe they don't have, someone that looks like them and speaks the same languages as them. So how can they be provided the proper care? So like there's all these things that really kind of are leveled into it.
Thank you all. That was fantastic. And I think I heard a couple of key points, right? There's a lot of, maybe misconceptions about clinical trials or mistrust. And there's a lot of ways that sites are trying to better engage and better enroll participants from all types of communities. So I think the question I'd like to think about next is, if you were to speak to someone who is considering participating in a trial for themselves or even for a loved one, what is some advice or suggestions, aside, of course, from asking all the questions that you could possibly have? What is some advice that you think would be helpful for participants to really think about when considering participating in a clinical trial?
What I think people don't necessarily know for sure is that no clinical trial starts just by somebody snapping their hand. That before a clinical trial can start, you have different steps, different conditions that sponsor or somebody sponsoring or paying for that clinical trial has to go through. First and foremost, you have safeguards, you have checkpoints that make sure that what you are trying to do is safe as it can be, and that you are not cutting corners, and that you are protecting the rights of study participants. So your protocol goes through the FDA if you are doing it here in the US. Your protocol will have to go through the independent review, IRB, Independent Review Board. And for different institutions, they may have their own independent ethics committees from their own institution. So those members of that board will have to review your protocol. They will have to review the informed consent, and you explain to them that there is something called informed consent, which means you have to agree to do it. And then it makes it clear that you can stop anytime you want. You don't have to give any reason. And then that those documents have to be reviewed by those independent bodies, and they have to approve it before you can start conducting the study. So just to assure people that, yes, in the past, there have been instances where there wasn't any such thing as informed consent or people cut corners, but now you have those safeguards to make sure that the rights of study participants are protected.
As a client and as a patient, what I tell people is you're the boss, and you're not used to being the boss in your medical surroundings. When I say the boss, I mean you decide how much further you want to go with the study. I remember one study, I was taking 10 of these huge fish oil pills a day. And after 5 or 6 days, I said, I can't do this. I just can't do this. I just, my stomach is hurting all the time. And they were very, very happy to let me go. And they assured me that there was nothing I wasn't being blackballed. There wasn't any negativity. Another study I was in, the records I was asked to keep were oppressive. I just had to keep too many records, and I had to, a fall was defined as, anytime you kind of listed over to one side or something, it seemed, and that was too much for me too. And I told them that. And that was a few years ago. I'm in other studies now, and that trust and that feeling that you're in control, especially when you are so used to not feeling in control, was very helpful for me. And I emphasize that when I urge people to volunteer.
I want to add a couple of things to this. I want to be sensitive, and I'm not trying to be clever here. My experience where I was receiving treatment, I have long pandemic hair. I've been shaving the underneath, and I put on earrings for today's event, but I am definitely androgynous and queer presenting. And where I was receiving treatment outside of a trial, I felt anxious about that. I felt punished by one of my providers. I heard a nurse making racist jokes. And so for me, participating in a trial actually felt safer than the community setting where I was receiving my primary treatment. And I'm saying, I don't want to bring that up to be clever, because I don't know if that is true for everyone. There's always been safeguards. We have a constitution. And still people get oppressed and harmed. But for me, I definitely felt physically safer receiving treatment in a trial. I moved from one area. I'm on the East Coast. Breastcancertrials.org is on the West Coast, which is how I got involved. But I was able to receive treatment through a trial in Boston, and the staff was international, and a lot of women had short hair and dark glasses. I don't know. My daughters and I watched the British Bake Off, and they would, Sue with the dark hair, and Mom, she looks like you. We've never seen anyone look like you. So so for me, there was a real level of safety, and my asking questions was not considered a nuisance during my trial, like it was during my primary treatment where I was receiving treatment. So I just wanted to put out there, everybody's going to have a different experience, but that was certainly mine. You asked about trial participation. I imagine it's different if you have early stage disease versus metastatic for cancer versus MS. I would say if you have early stage breast cancer like I did, some of the big questions for me that I thought were important were, if I take this drug during a trial, does it preclude me from getting that drug in the future if I have a metastatic recurrence? Everybody watching this has a different illness thing. CDK4/6 inhibitors are a type of drug that's really revolutionary for metastatic breast cancer of a certain type. I took it for early stage disease. It would have been a real bummer if I couldn't take it if I had metastatic disease in the future, because I have a friend who's 7 years now without any disease progression on it. So it was important for me to ask those questions, because the clinical trial site did not volunteer that information. And I don't think that people necessarily know that if you take drug A, you might not get to take drug B or C because you took it in a certain order. So that's really important, and people need to ask. And it's confusing. So if you can't figure it out yourself, and many people can't, I'm married to a pathologist, so I could ask him a lot of questions, get a patient advocate or for someone to help you figure that out. And then I would say for people with metastatic breast cancer, again, it's a big question of, if I do this treatment now, how does that affect my future treatment choices? I think a lot about radiation therapy. Now people are doing cryoablation for bone mets. Well, if you do that, can you get radiation therapy if that doesn't work? Or if you do radiation therapy, are you precluded? There's like there's an ordering to treatments that's really complicated and always changing. And I think those are the big questions to ask. And also, you got to know what you want. I make this joke all the time. When I met with my radiation oncologist, I said, could you just cut off my head and put it in a jar? I will do anything to stay alive. And he's like, I don't understand the reference. I watch a lot of sci-fi, but then I know some women who, I'm having a second mastectomy, a prophylactic, who really want to keep their breasts and their nipples, and they want to dial back their treatment to save parts of their body. And so you got to know what you want. And there are trials for all of it. I mean, I don't know about Helen's experience, but I know there are plenty of treatment trials for breast cancer. We're trying to dial back what they give people. I would never do that in a million years. It's just not my personality. So I think you got to be clear about what you're looking for, and also know there are a lot of possibilities. I think people, when they think clinical trial, immediately assume they're going to get more treatment. Sometimes it's less treatment. Sometimes it's just for side effects. You know, there are lymphedema trials, and finally they're talking about the sexual side effects of estrogen treatment for breast cancer, you know. So look around. If you're really struggling, trials are a great place to find information, but you got to know what you want, and treatment order really matters. Sorry if I went off.
No, that was perfect. You made a lot of great points, Desiree. Thank you so much. I think we probably have time for about one more question, and then we have some audience questions that I'd like to pass off to you all. But I would like to ask, and maybe Rachel, you can tackle this one first. What types of programs do you have in place to enroll or engage a diverse patient population? Because I think this has been a thread throughout everyone's discussion, right? I mean, all different types of people from all different backgrounds have conditions, and how do we engage everybody? So Rachel, if you could maybe start.
Yeah, of course. Such an important question. I think, you know, specifically for the two infections that I focus on, HIV and COVID, they've both really been at the forefront in terms of thinking about minoritized populations and the disproportionate burden, you know, that those populations bear of both HIV and COVID. And so there's a variety of different ways that we use to try to engage with those communities. For COVID studies, for example, there's been a lot of work both through the CoVPN, which is the COVID Prevention Vaccines Network, to work directly with Indigenous communities, with Latinx communities, with Black communities, communities of faith, even barbershop networks, to really go to people and to talk to them about the research, to get buy-in ahead of time. And also just to talk about recruitment. And I think that's so important, especially the thing about COVID that's been so, I think, challenging is that community relationships are built over time, and they're not kind of one-off interactions. You can't just call somebody up and say like, hey, let's, you know, be partners for the next 5 minutes. And so really kind of building on a lot of these relationships that have already existed. The CoVPN, for example, and the Rise Above COVID study both come from the NIH and longstanding partnerships with communities affected by HIV. And a lot of those are, again, the same communities. And so just building on these longstanding partnerships and saying, hey, this is a new project, but we already are talking. And I think that's really important. The other thing is bringing studies to people and making sure that you have access in place. So for example, for COVID studies for people who are, you know, in isolation for COVID, they have to stay at home, or, you know, unless they're in medical care. And so, you know, unless you have your own private car and are well enough to drive yourself into a big city where one of these trials is happening, then you really can't enroll people. So there's been a big effort to use COVID-safe medical rides, where the drivers are wearing PPE and there's good ventilation in sort of separate compartments, but it's sort of like a cabulance that can go get people from where they are in a way that keeps them and everybody else safe, because obviously you can't ask your friend who hasn't been exposed to COVID to drive you in. And people shouldn't be taking public transportation, et cetera. So really just providing people that round trip transportation. In many cases, we've started remote studies that go to people. So there's a really amazing study that we're working on that's led by Washington University in St. Louis, but we're working on with the Hutch, called Stop COVID 2. And people do consent in English or Spanish via an online a secure web form while talking to one of our study staff. And then we overnight you, or even same day courier if you're local to where one of our shipping sites is, a box that has the card with the medication. In this case, it's a very safe medication. It's already FDA approved for a different purpose. So it's a repurposed drug, but we know it's safe for that other condition. And the card comes in the box with instructions in English or Spanish, a blood pressure cuff, a pulse oximeter to measure oxygen, and a thermometer. And people fill in daily web surveys, again, in the language of their choice, to give us their vital signs and how they're feeling. And so that's a way that if you're living in a very remote place where there isn't access to clinical trials, or you're part of, a rural community or an indigenous community, and you don't want to, or you can't get into a big city to participate in these studies, that we can sort of bring trials to people. So I think we've really been trying to innovate, especially with COVID, to reach people and to get buy-in, and really just understanding that I think, with COVID, anything that's new is more scary to people in terms of the speed with which science is developing. And so emphasizing that we want people that look like you, that are from your community, to participate, because at the end of the day, which maybe next week or 6 months from now, we need treatments that work that you would refer your friends to. We need a vaccine that you'd be willing to take yourself, or that you'd be willing to offer to your grandmother. And regardless of which community you come from, people in that community need to know that people who look like them, who have the same values as them, who have the same background as them, participated and contributed their data and their confidence in what we're developing.
Yeah, thank you so much. And I wanted to jump into some of the audience questions. So we've been receiving some great questions from our audience members. So I think the first one, and again, this can go to everyone here: how do individuals become aware of clinical trial opportunities if they have not been invited by their physician?
The organizations that I'm involved with, the National MS Society, et cetera, have a regular method of providing information to us. So I guess online, if you're not online, then it would be more difficult.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, technology is great. So at Johnson, we actually last year launched Research Includes Me, which is our educational website. It's kind of like a one-stop shop, though. So we'll touch on the education about clinical trials, the historical impact, what protections are involved, but then also if someone did want to get involved, we have links there to not only Johnson trials, but also I think ct.gov and a few other ones, so that people can go to the site and look for any trials that are applicable to them. But yeah, the website is great, and there's also some other great resources online. And you can also ask your healthcare provider.
That's such an important question. I just want to say that I asked my healthcare provider, my first oncologist, second oncologist, and I was told that I didn't qualify and there weren't any. So I think this is where a lot of the work needs to be done. It needs to be part of the conversation all through treatment. I mean, do you know, for breast cancer, there are clinical trials studying how often you need to get a mammogram. I mean, that would start easing people's comfort levels about this. For breast cancer only, I started looking at cancer hospital websites, and then I learned about clinicaltrials.gov, which is a website where every clinical trial in the United States has to be registered. It's very difficult to search, and it's very difficult to understand. If you have breast cancer, breastcancertrials.org is great. A lot of the more common cancers have their own clinical trial matching tool. So again, go online. I think lung cancer has a couple. Force has one for genetic cancers that have a family hereditary thing. But it's truly a problem, and people really need more information about this. It would be amazing if the government put together a website with all these user-friendly clinical trial finding tools.
Yeah, and if I could add, when we talk to patients, caregivers, and the general public about clinical research, I think you all have touched on some very important places to look that provide a lot of information, but it goes back to Desiree's point of just ask questions, ask people advocacy groups and support groups are always a great place for that, because those people are active in the community of their condition and looking for those opportunities, especially with rare conditions that don't often have clinical trials available. Those are the first people to find out and tell everyone that they know. And I think it's a great place to connect with others and find out more information.
And I think you also have old-fashioned way of not necessarily advertising, but bringing attention to the fact that there are some clinical. If you have trade fairs, for example, and then you have some literature, we develop literature that are IRB approved, that explain what is clinical trials, what may be happening, what are the sources where you can find out about clinical trials that may be happening in your area. So if there are events that those things can be utilized in, that's one thing. Another source is, it can be churches in the community or community leaders, make them aware of it. They can announce it to their congregation that XYZ is happening. If you want more information, come to me after service or something to that effect. So yeah, sometimes not everybody is technologically savvy to navigate some of those websites, and old-fashioned way of advertising may be the best route.
Thank you. That's a great point, Patrick. And I think, Rachel, you also mentioned that earlier, going to the community leaders or barbershops and spreading, more grassroots on the ground efforts for outreach is a great place to look as well. I think we have time for maybe one more question. So Helen, you talked about this earlier, but what is the process if a participant decides to opt out of a study? So this person said, I assume they don't just email or text someone. So is there a document they have to fill out and sign and date stating that they are declining further participation? Do they need to explain their reasons? What goes into that process, and what are participants being asked to do?
That's a great question. And the good news is I didn't have to do anything. I just emailed my person and said, I can't handle these fish oil pills anymore. Let me out. and she did, it was, and she spent a lot of time assuring me that it was okay. So that, I really appreciated that.
Can I add something to that too, which is that, one of the most important things in participating in a study is the altruistic component of providing for future science. And so I think there's a lot of misunderstandings that if people are not tolerating the treatment like the fish oil or something else, that you sort of should pull out of the trial. And what we really encourage people to do, if they're comfortable with it, is to continue participating and contributing their data, even if they choose to or cannot take the study intervention anymore. And what that means is that all of that effort that you as the participant have already put in, all of the samples that you've already given, still go to science and still help to collect that data. Because it's totally possible that, in the end, not very many people could tolerate that treatment, even if it was effective. And so it's important to sort of continue gathering that data or understanding how you did after you stopped the treatment, even if you took it for 3 days or 7 days and it was supposed to be a month. So really having a conversation with your research team about saying, hey, I don't feel comfortable doing this or taking this anymore, but I'm happy to still come in for blood draws or fill out surveys, or I don't have time to keep coming in, but you're allowed to keep my data or keep my samples. All of that means that your precious time and what you've contributed, even parts of, body, if it's biopsies or blood, still goes to helping future science.
So if I might add something, I think it's important to know that every informed consent makes it abundantly clear that you can withdraw from a study at any time for any reason or no reason at all. You are free to do that, and there shouldn't be any repercussions for doing that. However, one thing that is important that is also in the interest of the study participants is that when you opt out, there many times there is what you call safety follow-ups that is in the best interest of that study participants. If it is at all possible, work with the investigator to follow up on that safety follow-up assessments, because in addition to providing data, it is also a way for that investigator to monitor your health, monitor that you are okay, but you are free to withdraw anytime. But that follow-up visits or follow-up assessments, as much as possible, if it can be accommodated, it is vital, not only for collecting data, but more importantly, for the safety of the study participant that is withdrawing from the study.
Great. So another kind of question from the audience again is thinking about, especially for Helen and Desiree, when you were thinking about joining a clinical trial, is there anything that, did you have any misconceptions that changed over time once you were able to participate and go through that process? And how did you learn that information?
I think that I thought it was going to be more difficult than it was, and that it was going to be more time consuming than it was. And I guess I thought maybe the researchers would be less accommodating than they were. And everything was better than I thought it was going to be. So that was my experience.
Yeah, I was pretty prepared. I'm a reader and a preparer by nature for the trial and what to expect. But I was pleasantly surprised that the researchers were more accommodating than I expected. I did a trial where they go look in your bone marrow to see if there's any tumor cells. They seem to think that that's where they might hang out before you have a metastatic recurrence. And online it says you go once for it. And if they find the tumor cells, then you can join this other trial where they give you drugs for a year and see if they can get rid of them. What I didn't know was that they then invited me back. They didn't find any, but I can go every year for up to 5 years for them to go look around for that. So that was an unexpected benefit. And then I also got to be in a beta test. You call it beta or beta testing? There's a blood test now to look for recurrence for solid tumors. And before it was in a clinical trial, they were doing it in beta testing at this hospital. And because I'd been in another trial, I got invited to participate in that. So there were actually more benefits and more flexibility to being in the trial than I could foresee.
Wonderful. Well, I think that wraps up our time together. Thank you all so much for sharing your experiences and your knowledge with us. It's been such a fantastic time getting to hear your stories and experiences.
Thank you again to all of our speakers for volunteering your time. This has been highly informative, and we really appreciate all that you do to improve public health. And thanks to all those who submitted questions through the Q&A box. Please be sure to visit our FAQ section linked below the Resource Center for more information. Now let's all take a minute to get our bodies moving and follow along with Selena Ellers from Team Survivor Northwest as she leads us in a quick Zumba session. Team Survivor Northwest provides fitness and health programs, enabling cancer survivors to take an active role on their ongoing healing. So please enjoy. Thank you so much, Selena. You can visit Team Survivor's booth in the Informational Exhibit Center for more information about their work. Please take a moment to answer poll question number 5. True or false? Only people who are sick can volunteer in a clinical trial. There will only be 2 more poll questions throughout the program, so make sure you're testing your knowledge and you'll be eligible to win some awesome raffle prizes. I would like to thank each of you for joining us at Aware for All Northwest. We hope this is just the start of the conversation. There are a number of resources for you to refer to continue your learning, starting with the handbook, as well as our Informational Exhibit Center, where you can explore booths from local organizations. You can access the Informational Exhibit Center by clicking on the banner images or clicking the link on the resource list. All of our event materials can be found at awareforall.org, and they can serve as a guide with information about clinical trials right here in the Northwest, as well as information about clinical research participation. The 6th poll question is now up on your screen. How likely are you to tell your friends and family about something you learned today? We truly hope that you'll share some of your key takeaways. Now for the final poll question. What brought you to the Aware webinar today? You can select all answers that apply. Thank you to everyone who has answered the poll questions. You are now eligible to win one of the many wonderful prizes donated to us by our local supporters. And don't forget to look for that scavenger hunt kiosk in the Informational Exhibit Center for the chance to win more prizes. We'll be contacting our winners directly via email and on social media, so be sure to follow us on all social platforms. We also have a brief survey, which can be found by clicking the survey button on the bottom of your screen. We'd really appreciate if you could share your feedback with us as we continue to enhance this virtual version of the Aware for All program. And thank you to the medical heroes in attendance today. Without your gift of participation, we would not be able to conduct new research to discover new cures and treatments. Thank you all again for joining us this evening. We'll keep the event page open for a few more minutes before closing out the webinar, so that you can visit the Informational Exhibit Center, take our survey, or download the event handbook. We encourage you to visit awareforall.org to access the Informational Exhibit Center and other resources whenever you'd like. And we hope to connect with you at future Aware for All events. Have a great evening, everybody.